I never expected that a broken furnace in the middle of winter would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. It wasn't just about the cold or the inconvenience. It was about who walked through my door to escape it, and how the silence between us slowly filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the thermostat. Let me take you back. My name is Miles. At the time, I was 28 and worked from home as a graphic designer. My life was a neat collection of routines nested inside the walls of my one-bedroom apartment. I had my clients, my deadlines, my quiet evenings with a book or a movie. It was a life I had carefully constructed for myself, a fortress of solitude that felt safe, predictable, and, if I was being truly honest with myself, deeply lonely. My apartment building was an old brick walk-up, the kind with charming imperfections like creaky floors and radiators that hissed like angry snakes. I lived on the third floor, Unit 3B. Across the hall, in 3A, lived Caleb. Caleb was my polar opposite, or at least that's how he appeared from my carefully maintained distance. Where my life was quiet and contained, his seemed loud and expansive. He worked in construction, leaving early in the morning in steel-toed boots, and coming home late in the afternoon covered in a fine layer of dust, his laughter echoing in the hallway as he talked on his phone. He had friends over on weekends, the low thrum of music and conversation a familiar backdrop to my Saturday nights. He was, in a word, beautiful, not in a delicate, polished way, but in a rugged, lived-in way that felt both intimidating and completely captivating. He had broad shoulders and strong hands, a dusting of dark stubble that was always present on his jaw, and eyes the color of warm honey that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. And he smiled a lot, just not usually at me. Our interactions were limited to brief, functional nods in the hallway. "Hey," he'd say, and I'd offer a tight-lipped smile and a mumbled, "Hi," before scurrying into my apartment, my heart doing a stupid little tap dance against my ribs. I had, of course, cataloged every detail about him from these fleeting encounters. The way he carried his groceries in one trip, his biceps straining against the fabric of his t-shirt. The smell of sawdust and fresh air that clung to him. The tired but genuine way he'd greet our elderly downstairs neighbor, Mr. Henderson, always asking about his cat. He was kind, he was confident, and in my mind, he was completely, unshakably straight. He existed in a world of casual confidence that I could only ever observe from behind my peephole. He was the sun-drenched, vibrant life across the hall, while I was the quiet shadow in the doorway. That's how I saw it anyway. He was a foregone conclusion, a chapter in a book I wasn't allowed to read. So I kept my distance, admired him from afar, and told myself it was for the best. I had resigned myself to this pattern. The polite nod, the quick retreat, the quiet longing. It was a familiar ache, one I had learned to live with. It was just the background noise of my life, the low hum of what could never be. I didn't expect it to ever change. I didn't want it to. Hope, I had learned, was a dangerous and disruptive thing. It was far easier to live with the certainty of nothing than the possibility of everything. At least, that's what I told myself. Then came the first real cold snap of the year. The temperature plunged overnight, and the wind howled around the corners of our old building, rattling the window panes. I woke up to an apartment that felt like the inside of a refrigerator. My breath plumed in the air. The radiators, my hissing, clanking companions, were silent and stone cold. A quick check of the thermostat confirmed my suspicion. Nothing. A building-wide email from our landlord arrived an hour later. The furnace had given up the ghost. A repair technician was on the way, but due to the holiday weekend, it could be a day, maybe even two, before it was fixed. The email ended with a cheerful, unhelpful suggestion to bundle up and use extra blankets. I sighed, pulling on a second sweater. My fortress of solitude was about to become a very well-organized icebox. But here's the thing about me. I'm a planner. I'm the kind of person who has an emergency kit, who checks the weather obsessively, who fears being unprepared. Tucked away in my closet was a powerful little space heater I'd bought on sale years ago and never used. I pulled it out, plugged it in, and soon my living room was an oasis of warmth in the spreading Arctic of my apartment. I made a pot of tea, settled onto my couch under a thick woolen blanket, and felt a small, smug sense of satisfaction. I was prepared. I would be fine. I spent the day working, the quiet hum of the space heater a comforting counterpoint to the wail of the wind outside. As evening fell, the temperature dropped even further. The windows were feathered with frost, and I could feel the chill seeping in through the walls. My little heater was fighting a losing battle, but it was keeping my living room livable. The rest of the apartment, however, was another story. Around 8 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. It was a hesitant sound, not the confident rap I sometimes heard on Caleb's door when his friends arrived. I peered through the peephole, my heart giving a familiar, unwelcome lurch. It was him, Caleb. He was standing in the hallway, wrapped in a thick hoodie, his arms crossed over his chest, shivering. I took a deep breath before opening the door, trying to arrange my face into an expression of casual neighborliness. "Hey," I said, my voice a little tight. A blast of frigid air from the hallway washed over me. "Hey, Miles," he said, and the fact that he knew my name sent a ridiculous jolt through my system. "Sorry to bother you, man. This is gonna sound weird, but is your heat working? My place is an ice cave." He was hugging himself tighter now, and I could see his breath fogging in the air between us. "No, the whole building's out," I explained, gesturing vaguely behind me. "I've just got a space heater running." He peered past me into the warm glow of my living room, a look of desperate longing on his face. He looked genuinely miserable. "Oh man, lucky." He hesitated for a moment, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked younger than he usually did, less of the self-assured guy I saw from a distance, and more like someone just trying to get warm. The thought was disarming. He started, rubbing the back of his neck, a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically nervous. "Look, I know we don't really know each other, but would it be totally weird if I just, hung out in here for a bit? Just to thaw out? I'll stay out of your way. I can't feel my toes." My brain short-circuited. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at me to make an excuse, to say no, to retreat back into the safety of my solitude. But looking at him, shivering in my doorway, I couldn't. The kindness I had observed from afar kicked in, overriding the anxiety. "No, of course not," I heard myself say. "Come in. It's freezing out there." He gave me a smile of such profound relief, it was like the sun coming out. "Oh, thank you. Seriously, you're a lifesaver." He stepped inside, and I closed the door, sealing us both into the small, warm bubble of my living room. The quiet, predictable landscape of my life had just been fundamentally altered. Caleb was inside my fortress, and I had no idea what to do next. He gravitated toward the space heater like a moth to a flame, crouching in front of it and holding his hands out to the warm air. "Oh, that's the stuff," he murmured, closing his eyes for a second in pure bliss. I stood awkwardly by the door, watching him. My living room, my sanctuary, suddenly felt very small with him in it. He seemed to take up all the space, all the air. "Make yourself comfortable," I said, the words feeling stiff and formal. "Can I, get you something? Tea? Coffee?" He turned and smiled at me, that easy, crinkle-eyed smile that always made my stomach flip. "Tea sounds amazing. If you're making some." He shed his hoodie, revealing a faded band t-shirt, and sat on the edge of my armchair, still soaking up the heat. I retreated to the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I filled the kettle. This was surreal. Caleb, the guy from my daydreams, was sitting in my living room. I could hear him moving around, the soft scuff of his socks on my hardwood floor. I tried to focus on the simple, mechanical task of making tea, grounding myself in the familiar ritual. When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, he had settled onto the floor, leaning his back against the couch, closer to the heater. He had picked up one of the art books I'd left on the coffee table, a collection of architectural sketches. My coffee table was suddenly a minefield of my own private interests, now open for inspection. I felt strangely exposed. "This is cool," he said, tapping a finger on a detailed drawing of a cantilevered house. "You into this stuff?" "Yeah, a little," I admitted, handing him a mug. Our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second as he took it. A tiny spark of electricity shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. I was sure he didn't notice, but for me, it was a cataclysmic event. I like the way things are put together. The lines." He nodded, his eyes not leaving the page. "I get that. I work in construction. We just build what they tell us to mostly. But sometimes you see a set of blueprints, and you can just tell it's going to be something special. Something smart. He looked up at me then, a thoughtful expression on his face. It's like seeing the bones of a building before it has any skin. That was not what I expected him to say. I had imagined his job was all physical force and loud machinery. I had never considered the artistry in it, the appreciation for design. It was the first crack in the carefully constructed, one-dimensional image I had of him. I never thought of it like that, I said, and it was true. We sat there for a while, sipping our tea in a comfortable silence. He flipped through the book, occasionally making a quiet comment. I sat on the couch, pretending to watch the muted television but acutely aware of his presence just a few feet away. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap mixed with something uniquely him. It was intoxicating. "So," he said, closing the book and placing it gently back on the table. "You're a graphic designer, right? I think I heard you mention it to Mr. Henderson once." I was surprised again. "You remembered that?" He shrugged, a small, self-deprecating smile on his lips. "I pay attention sometimes." That simple sentence sent my mind racing. What else had he paid attention to? Did he notice the way I always hurried past his door? Did he see me watching him from my window? A wave of anxiety washed over me. "Yeah, I am," I managed to say. "I work from home. It's quiet." "Must be nice," he said, leaning his head back against the couch cushion. "My job is not quiet." He laughed, a low, warm sound that filled the room. "It's all yelling over saws and dropping things. Sometimes I wish I could just have a little peace." Here was another crack in the facade. The guy whose life I thought was a constant party was wishing for the very quiet I often found so oppressive. The lines between us were starting to blur. He wasn't just the loud, confident neighbor anymore. He was Caleb, a man who appreciated architecture and wished for a little peace and quiet. He was becoming real, three-dimensional, right here on my living room floor. As the hours passed, we talked more. It was easy, surprisingly so. We talked about movies we liked, about the city, about the absurdly high rent for our creaky old apartments. He told me about his family back in Ohio, and I told him about growing up in a small town a few hours away. There was no pretense, no awkwardness. It felt normal, natural. At one point, I got up to make more tea, and he followed me into the tiny kitchen. He leaned against the counter while I filled the kettle, making the small space feel even smaller. "You know," he said, his voice softer now, "I always thought you were, like, super serious. Maybe even a little standoffish." My stomach dropped. "Oh, no, not in a bad way," he added quickly, as if sensing my panic. "Just focused. You always seem like you're in your own world." I guess I was kind of intimidated. I almost laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. Caleb, intimidated by me? It was impossible. "I'm not," I said. "I'm just quiet." "Yeah," he said, his honey-colored eyes studying my face. I'm starting to see that. The look he gave me held a warmth that went far beyond the small space heater in the other room. It was a look of genuine curiosity, of dawning understanding. And in that moment, sitting in our shared cocoon of warmth against the winter cold, I felt a dangerous flicker of hope. It was a terrifying feeling. It was getting late. The digital clock on the cable box read 11:37 p.m. The wind had died down, but the silence outside only seemed to emphasize the cold. We had long since fallen silent, the soft hum of the heater the only sound in the room. Caleb was still on the floor, leaning against the couch. I was sitting on the couch, wrapped in my thickest blanket. He stifled a yawn, stretching his arms over his head. "I should probably head back," he said, though he made no move to get up. "Try to build a blanket fort or something. It's only going to get colder tonight," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. My apartment was probably 10, maybe 15 degrees warmer than his. Sending him back felt cruel. He sighed, running a hand through his already messy hair. "Yeah, I know." He looked genuinely defeated. "This sucks." We sat in the heavy silence for another minute. Every rational part of my brain was telling me to let him go, to end the night, to restore the comfortable distance between us. But another part of me, a braver, more reckless part, didn't want him to leave. "You can. You can stay here if you want," I offered, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't believe I was saying it. "On the couch. It's warmer in here." He looked up at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I held my breath, bracing for the rejection, for the moment he'd realize how weird this was and make a hasty exit. I had crossed a line, offered an intimacy that our brief acquaintance didn't warrant. But instead of looking weirded out, he just looked relieved. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "I don't want to impose." "It's fine," I said, my voice gaining a little confidence. "It's stupid for you to freeze over there when it's warm in here." A slow smile spread across his face. "Thanks, Miles." Really, he stood up and stretched again, his tall frame seeming to fill my entire living room. "Okay, couch it is." I went to my linen closet and pulled out my spare pillows and another comforter, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was happening. Caleb was going to sleep in my living room, just feet away from me. I arranged the pillows and blanket on the couch, trying to act as casual as possible, as if I had handsome, half-frozen construction workers sleeping over all the time. "There you go," I said, avoiding his eyes. "Perfect. Thank you," he said. He sat down on the couch, looking at the makeshift bed. Then he looked at me. "Good night, Miles." "Good night, Caleb," I replied, before making a quick retreat to my bedroom, closing the door most of the way but leaving it cracked open, just enough for the warmth from the space heater to creep in. I got into my own bed, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and exhilaration. I could hear the rustle of him settling into the couch, the soft sigh he let out. I lay in the dark, listening to the sound of another person breathing in my apartment, and felt a profound sense of rightness that scared me more than anything else. I must have drifted off at some point, because I was woken by the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. My eyes snapped open, my body instantly tense. The only light was the faint glow from the space heater in the other room, casting long shadows on the wall. A figure was standing in the doorway. It was Caleb. "Miles," he whispered, his voice thick with sleep. "You awake?" My heart hammered in my chest. "Yeah," I breathed. "What's wrong?" "It's nothing," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It's just, I'm still freezing, man." The couch is like a block of ice. He took a hesitant step into the room. Even with the blanket. I sat up, pushing my own blankets back. I didn't know what to say. The space heater was doing its best, but the sheer cold radiating from the windows and exterior walls was relentless. My bedroom, farther from the heater, was noticeably colder than the living room. He stood there for a moment, a silhouette against the dim light, hugging himself. He looked vulnerable, stripped of all the easy confidence I associated with him. He just looked cold. And then he said the words that tipped my world off its axis. "This is going to sound crazy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "But, can I get in with you? Just to get warm. I swear I'll stay on my side." The air left my lungs in a rush. My brain stalled, unable to process the request. Caleb wanted to get into my bed. My bed. The most private, intimate space in my entire apartment. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken possibilities. Fear and a wild, terrifying hope warred within me. The fear told me this was a mistake, a line that could never be uncrossed. The hope, however, whispered that this was everything I had ever wanted. Before I could overthink it into oblivion, before I could talk myself out of it, I heard my own voice, small and shaky in the darkness. "Okay." He didn't move for a second, as if he couldn't believe I'd agreed. Then, he slowly walked to the other side of the bed. The mattress dipped as he slid under the covers. The space, which had always felt so large and empty, was suddenly, shockingly, full. He was careful to keep a distance between us, lying stiffly on his back, just as he'd promised. But the cold radiating from him was intense. He was shivering, a fine tremor that I could feel through the mattress. Without thinking, I shifted, pulling the heavy comforter more securely over his side. "Here," I murmured. "Thanks," he breathed. The air was thick with a strange, charged energy. We were two people in a bed who shouldn't be, brought together by a fluke of machinery and temperature. I lay on my back, staring up at the ceiling, hyper-aware of every tiny movement, every breath he took. I could smell the faint scent of my laundry detergent on his shirt, the same scent that was on my pillows. It was disorientingly intimate. After a few minutes, his shivering began to subside, replaced by a steady warmth that slowly started to seep across the space between us. The silence was no longer awkward. It was something else. It was expectant. "Miles," he said again, his voice very close in the darkness. "Yeah," I whispered back. "I'm still so cold," he said, and there was a different quality to his voice now. It wasn't a complaint. It was a confession. And then he moved. He rolled onto his side, facing me. The distance between us vanished. He shifted closer and closer still, until his body was flush against mine. His arm came around my waist, pulling me against his chest. I froze, my entire body rigid with shock and a sudden, overwhelming flood of sensation. He was so warm, so solid. I could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against my back. My mind was a screaming mess of panic and disbelief. What was happening? Was this real? I had imagined a moment like this 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways, but it was always a fantasy, distant and safe. This was real. This was Caleb, holding me in my own bed. He tucked his face into the curve of my neck and shoulder, his breath warm against my skin. The stubble on his cheek was a rough, pleasant friction against my throat. I could feel the words forming in my throat to ask him what he was doing, to demand an explanation, but they wouldn't come out. All I could do was lie there, paralyzed by the sheer, unbelievable reality of it. He sighed, a deep, contented sound that vibrated through my whole body. He shifted again, pressing closer, as if trying to merge with me. His mouth, impossibly soft, brushed against the side of my throat. It wasn't a kiss. Not really. It was just a presence. A warmth. A pressure. But it sent a bolt of lightning straight through me. My mind went completely blank. There was no thought, no fear, only the stunning, overwhelming sensation of his mouth, warm and gentle, resting on my skin. He didn't move. He just stayed there, breathing softly, his lips a small point of heat against my neck. And slowly, tentatively, I began to relax. The tension drained out of my limbs, replaced by a heavy, liquid warmth that spread from that single point of contact. My body, which had been so rigid, softened against his. I let my head fall back slightly, giving him better access, an unconscious invitation. He responded with a soft hum of approval, his lips moving just slightly, a tiny, almost imperceptible caress. It was the most intimate thing I had ever experienced. It was more intimate than a kiss. It was quiet, and it was secret, and it was happening in the dark where nothing had to be named or defined. He wasn't the confident construction worker from across the hall anymore, and I wasn't the quiet, anxious graphic designer. We were just two people, seeking warmth in the cold, finding it in the most unexpected way. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't alone in the dark, and I fell asleep to the feeling of his breath on my skin. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my window and the unfamiliar weight of an arm slung over my waist. For a blissful, hazy second, I simply enjoyed the warmth, the feeling of being held. Then memory came rushing back in a tidal wave, and my eyes flew open. Caleb. He was still there, tucked against my back, his face buried in my pillow, breathing deeply. He was fast asleep. The morning light stripped away the dreamlike ambiguity of the night. This was real. This was happening. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my contentment. What had I done? What had he done? What did it mean? I replayed the moment over and over in my head. His mouth on my throat, the solid weight of him against me, my own willing surrender. Carefully, slowly, I disentangled myself from his arm, slipping out of bed. He mumbled something in his sleep and rolled over, pulling the blankets tighter around himself. I stood there for a moment, just looking at him. In the daylight, he looked younger, his face relaxed in sleep. A stray lock of dark hair had fallen across his forehead. The urge to reach out and brush it back was so strong it made my fingers ache. I resisted, backing away and pulling on a pair of sweatpants. I tiptoed out to the living room. The space heater was still humming away dutifully. A quick look out the window showed a maintenance van parked out front. As if on cue, I heard a loud clank from the basement, followed by the familiar, glorious hiss of the radiators coming back to life. The heat was back on. The crisis was over. My stomach twisted into a knot. The excuse for him being here, for any of it happening, was gone. The cold had been our shield, our reason. Now, there was just the awkward, sunlit reality of the morning after. I was in the kitchen, making coffee with trembling hands, when he finally emerged from the bedroom. He was shirtless, rubbing the sleep from his eyes with the back of his hand. My brain helpfully supplied a high-definition image of his toned torso and the light dusting of hair on his chest. I quickly turned back to the coffee maker, my face burning. "Morning," he said, his voice raspy. Morning, I squeaked, my voice an octave too high. The heat's back on. I said it with a forced brightness, as if delivering wonderful news. Oh, cool, he said the word, but his tone was flat. He ran a hand through his hair, looking around my apartment as if seeing it for the first time. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, heavy with the memory of the night before. The easy camaraderie from the previous evening had evaporated, replaced by a tense, fragile awkwardness. He walked over to the radiator and placed a hand on it. Wow, yeah? It's getting warm fast. He didn't look at me. He was avoiding my eyes. And that, more than anything, confirmed my worst fears. He regretted it. He was embarrassed. He probably woke up and had a moment of what the hell did I do? Panic. I had been a warm body in a cold room, nothing more. A regrettable, confusing mistake. Well, he said, turning from the radiator and grabbing his t-shirt from the armchair where he'd left it. I guess I should. Get out of your hair. He pulled the shirt on, and just like that, he was back to being Caleb, the guy from across the hall, putting his armor back on. Thanks again, for everything, he said, now standing by the door. He still wasn't really looking at me, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. You were a total lifesaver. He was using the same words he'd used when I first let him in, but they sounded different now. They sounded like a dismissal, a way to frame the entire experience, including what happened in my bed, as a simple act of neighborly charity. No problem, I mumbled, staring at the floor. I wanted to say something, to ask, to understand. But the fear of what I might hear kept my mouth shut. The fear of him confirming that it was all a mistake, that he was straight and just desperate and cold, was too much to bear. Silence was safer. He opened the door. All right, well, see you around, Miles. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in my apartment, which suddenly felt too quiet and too warm. The scent of him lingered in the air, a ghost of the night's intimacy. I walked back to my bedroom and stood in the doorway, looking at my unmade bed. The indentation of his head was still visible on the pillow next to mine. I felt a profound and hollow ache spread through my chest. It had meant everything to me, and it had clearly meant nothing to him. The days that followed were a special kind of torture. The easy truce of polite, distant nods was gone, replaced by an excruciating, charged avoidance. If I heard him coming down the hall, I'd wait until he was gone to leave my apartment. I started taking the back stairs to avoid the main entrance. Once, we nearly collided at the mailboxes. We both froze, a deer-in-headlights moment that lasted an eternity. Hey, he said, his voice strained. Hi, I muttered, grabbing my mail and practically running up the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The brief eye contact was like a physical blow. I saw confusion in his eyes, and something else I couldn't name. Or maybe I was just projecting my own turmoil onto him. My apartment became my prison again, but it was no longer a sanctuary. It was haunted. Every time I sat on the couch, I remembered him sitting on the floor, flipping through my book. Every time I lay in my bed, I could feel the ghost of his warmth, the phantom pressure of his mouth on my throat. I couldn't escape it. I spent hours dissecting every moment of that night. It was a masochistic exercise in self-torment. He said he was cold. That was the simplest explanation, wasn't it? People do strange things when they're seeking basic survival needs like warmth. He was probably half asleep. It was instinct. He'd huddled against me the way a stray cat would huddle against an engine block. It was primal, not personal. But then another part of my brain, the hopeful, treacherous part, would fight back. It would replay the way he looked at me in the kitchen. I'm starting to see that, he'd said. It would remember the way he said my name in the dark, the confessional tone of his voice when he said, I'm still so cold. It would linger on the feeling of his lips, the soft hum of approval when I relaxed against him. That didn't feel like a mistake. It felt intentional. This internal debate raged constantly. Hope versus reality. Fear versus desire. I was losing my mind. 1 minute, I was convinced he was straight and horrified by what had happened. The next, I was certain he felt the same way I did, but was too scared or confused to admit it. Both possibilities were equally terrifying. The ambiguity was eating me alive. I missed the simple days of just admiring him from a distance. At least then, the lines were clear. Now, everything was a blur. The silence stretched for a week. A week of near misses in the hallway. of me holding my breath whenever I heard his door open. I was becoming a hermit, ordering groceries online, avoiding any reason to leave. I felt like I was back in high school, hiding from a crush, except now the crush had slept in my bed and held me all night. The stakes felt impossibly high. I had finally decided that I needed to accept the simplest explanation. It was a fluke, an anomaly. He was straight, it was weird, and he wanted to forget it ever happened. The best thing I could do, for both of us, was to go back to the way things were. Polite nods, distant hellos. Bury the memory so deep it couldn't hurt me anymore. It was a grim resolution, but it felt necessary for my own sanity. I would grieve the loss of a thing I never really had, and I would move on. It was with that grim determination that I finally forced myself to leave my apartment to do laundry. I was heading down the stairs, basket in hand, when I heard his door open behind me. Miles, wait. I froze, my hand tightening on the plastic handle of the laundry basket. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just stood there, my back to him, bracing myself. Can we talk? He looked nothing like the confident, breezy guy I had built up in my head. He just looked like a man who had something difficult to say. Okay, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He gestured with his head back toward his apartment. Can you come in? For a second, my apartment had been our neutral ground, a temporary bubble created by circumstance. His apartment was his territory. Stepping inside felt like a significant escalation. I nodded, my heart beginning its familiar, frantic drumming. I left my laundry basket on the landing and followed him inside, the door clicking shut behind us with a soft, final sound. His apartment was the mirror image of mine, but it felt completely different. There were tools in a neat row on a workbench against one wall, a well-worn armchair that looked incredibly comfortable, and framed black and white photos of landscapes on the walls. It was clean and organized, but in a lived-in, masculine way. It smelled like him, that scent of sawdust and soap. He didn't invite me to sit. He just stood in the middle of the room, still avoiding my gaze, rubbing the back of his neck. The silence was deafening. I waited, my entire being coiled like a spring. Look, he finally started, his eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. About the other night. I've been a total idiot. My stomach plummeted. Here it comes, I thought. The apology. The I'm not gay speech. The let's just forget this happened plea. I braced myself for the impact. I'm sorry, he continued, and I flinched. I'm sorry for how I acted the next morning, and for avoiding you all week. That wasn't fair to you. He finally looked up and met my eyes. The confusion I'd seen before was gone, replaced by a raw, earnest vulnerability that stunned me. I freaked out, he admitted, his voice low. I woke up, and you were gone, and the heat was on, and it was all just real, in the daylight, and I didn't know what to do. I just stared at him, unable to form words. This was not the speech I had prepared myself for. He took a hesitant step closer. The thing is, Miles, I wasn't just cold. The 4 words hung in the air between us, charged with a million unspoken possibilities. My carefully constructed defenses, my grim resolutions, my logical explanations, they all shattered into dust. That night, getting into your bed, he continued, his voice shaking slightly. That wasn't just about the heat. I mean, I was freezing, that part was true. But it was an excuse. I've wanted to, I don't know, get closer to you for a while now. I felt my jaw go slack. I was dreaming. This had to be a dream. What? I managed to whisper. I know, he said, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. I know I don't seem like the type. Or maybe I do, I don't know. I've never done this before. With a guy, he looked down at his hands, then back at me, his gaze pleading for understanding. But watching you, I don't know. You're quiet, and you're kind, and you have this whole world going on inside your head. I saw it, and I wanted to know what it was like in there. He took another step. We were only a few feet apart now. That night, when you let me in, when we were talking, it was the easiest I've felt with anyone in a long time. And then in your bed, I wasn't thinking, I just acted. I just did what I wanted to do. And it felt right. It felt more right than anything has in a long time. He paused, searching my face. And then I panicked. I thought I'd crossed a line, that I'd totally misread everything and made you uncomfortable. So I ran. Like a coward. I finally found my voice. I thought you regretted it, I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I thought you were straight, and it was a mistake, and you were disgusted, or... No, he cut me off, his voice firm. He closed the remaining distance between us, his hands coming up to gently cup my face. His palms were warm and slightly rough against my skin. No, Miles. Not disgusted. Terrified. Because I liked it. I liked it so much. His honey-colored eyes were locked on mine, and in their depths, I saw everything I had been too afraid to hope for. I saw sincerity. I saw desire. I saw the same fear and uncertainty that I had been feeling all week, and seeing it in him made my own fear recede. I like you, Miles, he said, his voice barely a whisper now. And I'm sorry it took me a week of acting like an idiot to be able to say it. And then, he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't like the hesitant, ambiguous touch in the dark. This was a real kiss. It was gentle but firm, questioning but confident. It was a kiss that held all the unspoken words of the past week, all the anxiety and the longing. It tasted of coffee and mint and the stunning, unbelievable relief of mutual confession. I melted into it, my hands coming up to rest on his waist. My laundry was forgotten on the landing. The world outside his apartment door ceased to exist. There was only this. The warmth of his mouth, the solid feel of his body against mine, and the quiet, overwhelming certainty that this was not a mistake. This was real. This was the start of something. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. Okay, he whispered. I let out a shaky laugh, a sound filled with a week's worth of pent-up tension and hope. Yeah, I said, my voice full of wonder. More than okay. In the weeks that followed, my world bloomed into color. The quiet, gray routine of my life was infused with the vibrant warmth of Caleb. We moved slowly, cautiously at first, like two people learning a new language. But the grammar was surprisingly simple, the vocabulary innate. It turned out that getting coffee was a universal phrase, as was watching a movie, though now it usually happened on the same couch, under the same blanket. His apartment or mine became our shared space. The hallway between us was no longer a void of avoidance, but a path we crossed multiple times a day, often just to say hello, to share a quick kiss before he left for work, or to ask what the other wanted for dinner. The silent, one-dimensional neighbor from my daydreams was replaced by the real Caleb, a man who was terrible at cooking pasta, but surprisingly good at fixing my perpetually leaky faucet, who had a ridiculously loud laugh, and who held my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. He showed me the blueprints he sketched in his spare time, designs for cabins and small, smart houses, just like the ones in my book. I learned that his tough exterior was a protective shell around a deeply thoughtful and surprisingly sensitive heart. And he, in turn, seemed endlessly fascinated by my world, by the quiet way I worked, the way I saw colors and shapes and lines. He didn't just look at my designs. He asked questions, wanting to understand the why behind them. He saw me, truly saw me, in a way I hadn't realized. I was desperate to be seen. One evening, about a month after that first, real kiss, we were lying on my bed. It was a warm spring night, the windows open to the sounds of the city. There was no need for a space heater, no pretense of a manufactured crisis. He was propped up on an elbow, tracing patterns on my arm with his finger, and I was watching the play of lamplight on his face. You know, he said softly, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. I'm glad my furnace broke. I laughed, turning to face him. I think you mean our furnace. He smiled, that easy, crinkle-eyed smile that still made my heart skip a beat. Right. Our furnace. He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, comfortable kiss that spoke of familiarity and belonging. Best damn thing that ever broke in my life. And in that moment, lying there in the comfortable warmth, I thought about how strange life is. You can build walls around yourself, create a safe and predictable routine, and convince yourself that you are content with being alone. You can tell yourself that hope is a dangerous thing, that wanting more is just a recipe for disappointment. And you can believe it for a very long time. But sometimes, life has other plans. Sometimes, a furnace breaks. Sometimes, the person you've been watching from afar is just as lonely as you are. And sometimes, the very thing you were most afraid of, letting someone in, making yourself vulnerable, turns out to be the only thing that can truly make you feel warm. You just have to be brave enough to open the door when they knock.